Hey folks, Quilly18 here, and welcome to another Unity 3D tutorial. I will be using my normal voice today because A, people have requested that I not do the weird voice thing again, and B, a lot of people requested that we look at sound in Unity 3D, and I thought, well, perfect, that's a great simple little project to do, but of course, we're not going to be, I'm not going to be changing the pitch of the video if we're going to be looking at sound. So we've got a brand new empty project here, and we are going to look at how we can play with sound effects. And to start off with, we're going to set up a very simple scene. It's going to introduce a couple of concepts that we'll look into more in depth later on. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw down a plane right over here. I'm going to center the plane, and I'm going to make it a little larger just so that we have an area to move around in. So, oops, not in the Y direction, but in the Z direction there. So we have a nice large plane. We're going to add a basic directional light to our scene. And then we are actually going to add a dummy third-person type character to the scene so that we can move around the scene, because we're going to be looking at positional audio, among other things. So we're going to go into the Asset menu, go Import Package, and we are going to import the Character Controller package. Now, we can run characters without importing one of these packages, but the nice thing about this package is that it includes many pre-made little helpers that we can use to quickly develop something. It's got some placeholder content, including an actual model that we can play with, and some scripts that we can rely on. So I'm going to drop a third-person controller into the scene so that we can get a real sense of physicality at things. So I'm just going to drop it right in our scene, and you can see it comes with a little construction model worker, and we just have to, well, I'm going to center him like so. I've lost him, and I think I've got to move him 1 unit. Yeah, because the capsule that he's in is 1 unit down. So we're just going to move him up in the scene. And at this point, people are like, well, hey, why don't you tell us about how to program this third-person controller? We will look at that at some future video. Right now, I just want someone to be in here. I'm going to make sure his animations are rigged in, just selected correctly. I don't know why these aren't linked by default. Run animation and a jump pose animation. And if we play this with the maximize on play, we should have our character here, our little workman Bob, who can walk around our scene. He can even run if I hold down shift. And if I walk to the edge of the plane, I will fall straight down. You'll notice the camera follows my construction worker, and all is well in the world. So we're going to use him to demonstrate positional sound. The first thing you need to know about sound is every scene needs one, and exactly one, sound or audio listener, rather. By default, it is attached to the main camera. Often this will be correct. Sometimes, though, you may want the sound to be attached to the actual character. So in our game here, obviously our camera hovers slightly behind our character. So we're going to be hearing sound as if we are in the position of camera as opposed to the position of our character. I don't think it's going to make much of a difference in this game, but it's important to know, and it might make a slight difference, especially if you're playing in a game where the camera can be pulled back quite a bit further from your character. You might want your audio listener to be on the character itself, or you might want it on a camera. You know, it's going to really, really depend. Now that we've got that, we can look at adding a sound source in the game. So the first thing we need to do is pull a sound file into our project. And for this, I'm going to use an amazing little song put together by one of my viewers, Metal Renard, who has an amazing YouTube channel filled with incredible music that has been used in all kinds of different places. Definitely go check him out. There should be a link in the description box. If there isn't, yell at me in comments for me to put one in. But it's youtube.com/metalrenardmusic. And his songs are awesome, and he sent me one to use for this project, which I'm very excited. So I'm just going to drag it right into my assets. It's going to import that. During the importing, I believe it's going to be looking at peaks and that sort of things, and generating a little bit of data. It is important that mono and stereo sound can make a significant difference in this game when you're using 3D audio, because you can actually decide how far apart physically in the world space the left and right channel are, so that if you actually have, say, a stereo in the game, you could line things up in such a way that the left and right sound actually come out of different speakers. However, if that's not something that matters, for example, if it's going to be a character speaking and the sound is all basically going to be coming out of one point, you can actually downsample all these to mono and really save yourself a lot of space and a lot of effort. Yeah, because you don't need the stereo sound in those situations. So Here we have our audio clip. And there's a few settings we can do. We can specify whether it's a 3D sound or not. And that's pretty important. If we turn off the 3D sound, then what will happen is when the song plays, it doesn't matter where in the world it's playing from, it will play at full volume. And an example of where you might want this to be is if it's supposed to be background music that just plays and you're supposed to just hear it at a crisp, constant level, then you will want to disable 3D sound. And then when you play the music, it's just going to play like normal. If you use 3D sound, then where you position it in the scene and a variety of other parameters you set on the sound will affect how loud it is. The closer you get, the louder it will become. When you're too far away, you won't hear it at all. You can also affect a variety of things for performance, which definitely is beyond the scope of this video. Usually the basics are going to be perfectly fine for simple games anyway. All right, so now that we've got that, we are going to have to add an audio source to our world. And I keep trying to move the camera around in the wrong view. So we have our world here. We're going to add an audio source in front of our little character, a little further away, so somewhere off in the distance over here. And to do that, we need an object. Now, I'm going to represent it with an actual, say, a cube. So I've got a physical object to look at in the game. I'm going to bring it down to hover just above the surface. I will center it in the X and then push it a little further away. So there's going to be a hovering cube in front of me. If I go into my game, I'll be able to see that a little further off in the distance. So here's the cube, and I'm going to make this the audio source. This is some kind of source of music. Of course, plenty of people will use invisible objects to be the center of their audio source for a variety of reasons, variety of environmental sound, which you can obviously do with an empty game object. They're very, very common. I'm just going to use a physical representation so it's a little easier to see. And to this cube, I'm going to attach a component that is an audio source. Now it's got an audio source, and you can even see a little bit of a radius around it. We can attach an audio clip to this, which I will do by attaching my one sound. And let's see what happens if I play it as is. Play the game. Oh, you can hear something. And we move up to the cube. Gets a little louder. Hopefully I've got my sound settings okay over here. Let me crank my computer sounds. Make sure it carries over into the recording. And now I'm going to run away. Oh. I don't know if the 3D sound is going to properly come through on YouTube, but right now it's coming entirely out of my right speaker, and as I turn around, it's coming entirely out of my left speaker. So I've got real positional audio, and I believe Unity supports surround sound properly, so if you've got a fancy 5.1 surround sound setup, you will hear it fine. And as we move away from the sound, things get very quiet. So everything is working as intended. And it's going to get louder, and there we have it. Now, if I come back here, there's several parameters I can do to play with the audio source. I can just mute the audio, in which case it will play, it will progress through its audio timeline, but you won't actually hear anything. Obviously, just muting it like this would be kind of silly and pointless, but what you can do is you can mute the sound programmatically. Just mute it, and then when you unmute it, it'll continue wherever it had progressed to at that point. You'll have to check the documentation for absolutely everything in here. There's the few things that can come up, especially if you're playing lots of sound at once. But the 3D sound settings are pretty interesting. There is all kinds of Doppler effects. For example, moving objects, fast-moving objects will give you that sort of... if you've ever listened to like a loud vehicle or like a motorcycle driving by you fairly quickly, you'll hear that the Doppler effect, which is the sound will come in and go... That sort of thing. Well, this will be simulated in-game. You can choose how the sound drops off. It drops off very quickly with distance and then sort of falls off this way. And this is relatively typical of how sound works. Think about your earphones. If you've got your earbuds in your ears, they can be so loud you can damage your hearing. But then put it down on your table just a foot away, and it's much quieter. And then walk just outside of the room, and you probably can't even hear it. Well, why does that happen? Well, it's because sound kind of does drop off this way. But you can play with this curve. You can actually change it if you want. And there's also a few different basic customization. So by default, it's logarithmic. You can also do a linear, or you can do a custom roll-off, which you can just fiddle with as much as you feel like, whatever is appropriate for your game. The spread is what I was talking about for the 3D sound. Now, I believe this is a mono song, so I don't think this is actually going to come up. But this is if you want to spread apart the 3D sound, in which case orientation is going to start to matter. I believe. I haven't played with this too much. Sound is a little bit beyond me. I'm not much of a music guy, but this at least gets you playing basic sound. Of course, this is just playing sound that sort of plays continuously. Actually, it doesn't even play continuously by default because it's not on loop. This is going to be a one-shot sound. This is often not the sort of sound people want. This is a great way to put some music in your game. Just attach the music to an empty game object and you're good to go. Of course, it will just loop one song. What if you want a playlist? Well, now we've got to turn to programming. So let's look at that next. Now, I've reopened our Brick Breaker project, and this is what we're going to try to add some sound to. Now, I need some sounds first of all, and I am going to add music, but I'm not going to do that quite yet. First, I'm going to work on sound effects, and for that, I'm going to pull up this great little website, bfxr.net. This is an amazing little tool that you can use to generate all kinds of bleeps and bloops for your different programs. And for example, let's try explosion. Right, some great sort of old school 8-bit kind of sound effects, all dynamically generated for you. By default, when you hit these buttons, it does a random one, but you can tweak all of the parameters to get the exact perfect sound that you want. Of course, I'm not really a sound guy, like I said, so I'm not entirely sure that I'm going to be able to come up with something really good. What about blip? Actually, I kind of like those sounds for the ball bouncing. Don't you? Yes, of course you're going to agree with me. Let's, you know what? Maybe we should use all three. So I'm going to take these sounds, I'm going to export them as a wave, and then I'm going to pull them into my program. All right, I've pulled in my 3 sounds as well as my music, and I've gone ahead and changed the audio format on the waves to tell it that I do want them compressed, because I'm planning on putting this out on the web, so I want the wave files to be shrunk down via OGG Vorbis. Wave files technically are slightly better on the CPU because they don't need to be decompressed basically during gameplay, but wave files are quite a bit bigger, and of course these little blips are fairly small, so it would have been a fairly lightweight file in the first place, but I really want the size to be smaller, and I think this is going to be fine. I've also turned off 3D sound on all of my little effects because in this game I don't really care for 3D sound. I want the volume to be consistent no matter where the ball is. I don't care about positioning. It's not that kind of game. I've also forced the sound to mono, so they'll be compressed down to mono because these little blips, the sound files do come in as stereo sounds, but both channels are exactly the same, so it makes no difference at all. So may as well go to mono, and they'll be half the size. Some viewers are a little confused about the meaning of the terms stereo and mono. It has nothing to do with the quality of the sound. Some people will refer to as really bad quality sound as a mono sound, but that's not what it is at all. Usually it's the compression, the bit rate, that actually controls whether the sound is good or not. Mono just means the sound only has a single sound channel, so you'll get the identical sound out of both speakers, whereas a stereo file can have different sounds coming out of both speakers simultaneously. So you need twice as much data to feed that. So it makes no sense for these little blips and bloops. So I've gone and done that there, and also for the music as well. I don't have to compress it because it's already compressed, and I also don't have to force it to mono because I think... No, it actually does have 2 sound channels. Oh, probably because it's not a wave. It probably doesn't give me the option to recompress or remodify what's going on. So that's that. So now we have to decide what the source of our sound will be. Now, it may represent a physical object in the game, much like in the last video, or sometimes it may just be a script running on some empty game object off screen, especially for non-positional kind of 2D sound that doesn't matter. That may be your audio manager. In this case, I think these blips that we've got are good sounds for when the ball bounces against something.